very much, Dave. Is this working? Is it working now?
Yes.
What did Bill Gates say? Be nice to nerds. They might end up being your boss. When Dave first started working, I was his first boss, and now he's my boss. But in 1973, 41 years ago, 5 people got together in Cliff Moran's office in Rhodes University to have the first of what was to become an annual meeting of biocontrol and later people who are interested in biological invasions. That's been going every year for 41 years, and it's now grown from 5 to 191 people, so that's really encouraging. It wasn't always as comfortable as a Carradine hotel, I can promise you that, but they were interesting meetings. And if anybody had asked us at any point during that period, have you got a strategy for invasive alien species management in this country, we would have to say no. And so I'm now going to take you through what we've developed here. It's about 16 chapters, and the way I'm going to do it is to just take you through each chapter. I'm not sure if I'll get through the whole lot in the 2 hours I've been allocated, but I'll try. First of all, what is a strategy? It's important to think about this. It's a high-level plan to achieve one or more goals under conditions of uncertainty. And the thing to notice here is, first of all, there has to be a goal. You have to be able to say, this is what we're trying to achieve over the next time period. And secondly, it's not a detailed management plan. So it's not, you don't look for the details here. It's a national scale 5 to 10 year plan. And as I know, the devil is always in the detail, and that's for you guys to sort out over the next 41 years. The background to this is that in 2011, the Working for Water program was transferred from Water Affairs into Environment Affairs. So up until then, it had been funded through Water Affairs and was focusing mainly on clearing invasive alien plants. The mandate has now been broadened to address the management of established, to cover all taxa at all stages of invasion and not just established alien plants. In September last year, they finally got round to commissioning this job and told us that you have to have it finished by the end of March. It was a non-flexible deadline. So we had 6 months to do this in, and it was quite challenging because in the middle of that 6 months you've got Christmas and New Year and all that sort of thing happening. Not only that, they published the draft regulations in February, and we had to go back and rewrite the whole thing to account for the new regulations. But that's standard, isn't it? Luckily, there are several examples of national strategies that we could have a look at to give us some guidelines. These are typically about 50 pages long, and our strategy turned out to be 200 pages almost. So ours is a lot more detailed, and it's tailored to the specific circumstances of the country. I must just acknowledge my contributing co-authors here. There were about 20 of us that wrote this thing. There's quite a selection of ecologists, botanists, zoologists, entomologists, microbial biologists, marine scientists. We've also got 2 economists on the team, Miles Mander and James Bluchnote, helped with the economics, and Terry Winstanley, a legal lawyer, an environmental lawyer, not a legal lawyer. So that was the team. Now, we do have a big problem. In terms of government funding, the environment always gets shortchanged, but we estimate that this problem is costing the country in the region of 9 billion rand per year, and everywhere you look there are invasive species. There are pine trees invading the fynbos. That's Parthenium at the top right there, which is becoming a big problem in KwaZulu-Natal. Pom-pom weed, which is invading the grasslands of the Highveld. If you look under the water, you'll find trout and bass. Any trout people there? And hundreds of insects as well. The other thing is that this is not new to us. We've been doing this for a long time in this country. Last year marked 100 years since the first biological control agent was released in South Africa in 1913. And there's a very nice little paper there by Cliff Moran and his colleagues which tells the story of that 100 years. If you want to read it, it's in South African Journal of Science. And the bottom photographs there show parts of the Karoo in 1920, which was covered in prickly pear cactus, which has been cleaned up by biological control, and we tend to forget these things. And in the 1970s and 80s, the Department of Forestry had active programs clearing invasive plants from the fynbos regions, the mountain catchments. So we've got strengths in managing these plant invasions, and we also have strengths through the Agriculture Department in looking at pests or preventing pests from coming in that might be a problem for agriculture. But we are weak in addressing non-plant invaders, environmental biosecurity. Our legislation is a bit of a mess. And early detection and rapid response has only been recently started. So there are strengths and weaknesses here. We adopted this framework to guide the preparation of the strategy. So what you see there is the 4 recognized stages of an invasion process. Stage 1 is before the organisms get to the country. Stage 2 is when they get through the net and they're just starting to establish. Stage 3 is when they're actively spreading, and stage 4 is when they're dominant. And at the top of those squares there, you see there are 3 different ways of looking at it. You can have a species-based approach. So, for example, there's a strategy going on now, I believe, for the managing Parthenium in KwaZulu-Natal. So that would be a species-based approach. The second one is an area-based approach. So you might have a management plan for a national park or a protected area. And the third one is a pathway-based approach. So how do things move around the planet and around the countryside? And if we use that as a template to make sure that we covered all aspects of the problem. The goals of the strategy are around those 4 stages. So the first goal is to reduce the risk of introducing new species that may become invasive. The second goal is to eradicate those introduced species where possible and desirable. Things that escape the net you might not want to eradicate them because they're not a pest. Reducing the rate of spread of invasions and reducing the impacts of existing invasions. Those are the 4 main goals, and then there are a bunch of cross-cutting goals in the strategy. Establishing an effective legislative and regulatory environment, developing adequate capacity to manage this problem and to do research, ensuring cross-sectoral coordination and collaboration. There's a lot of government departments that are doing different things with invasive species. There's a lot of scope for collaboration there. Raising awareness, effective monitoring and evaluation needs to be done, and then providing enough money. So these are cross-cutting goals of the strategy. So stage 1, currently the situation is that quarantine and risk assessments are done by the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. And they focus mainly on agricultural pests and diseases. That's been their historic approach. And the Department of Environment Affairs is only now starting to get into the business of managing invasive species across all strategy or across all stages. So they have to start from scratch. They haven't been in this business at all up until now. So their strategic approach is to develop protocols for doing risk assessments, so deciding when or not to allow something into the country, giving or issuing permits for all new species that are imported, if they are allowed in. There's a Marine Ballast Water Act on the cards before Parliament now, I think. And they are going to start slowly and incrementally increase their capacity. So my understanding, I think Nomaslubi is talking about this later in the symposium, they're going to start at OR Tambo Airport, they're going to expand to Durban Harbour, and then slowly they are going to expand to other ports of entry. So it's an incremental approach. Stage 2 is these are the things that slip through the net and manage to get into the country. And there you have to decide, before their populations become too big, are we going to eradicate them or not? Now, eradication is possible. There have been over 700 documented eradications from around the world, most of them on islands, but there are some from mainlands. And that snail over there is the only species that's actually been eradicated from South Africa. It slipped through the net, I think, in the 1960s, and they managed to eradicate it before it got established. We have tried to eradicate Himalayan tars of Table Mountain and house crows from Durban and Cape Town. We haven't quite succeeded yet, so that there have been some attempts. And what you see in that little table down there is what is called in the NEMBA regulations Category 1A species. Those are the species that are targeted for potential eradication. And you can see there are, I think, 33 plant species, 4 mammal species, and so on that are going to be targeted for eradication. I'm not sure why the Indian house crow isn't a Category 1A species. So the strategic approach here is essentially this new unit at Sandby, which, if you want to read about it, John Wilson and his colleagues have also published a paper in the South African Journal of Science on the new National Unit for Invasive Species Detection, Assessment and Eradication Planning. So that's the strategy, get that unit up and going. And then we get to stages 3 and 4. This is things which you can no longer eradicate. So they're established, you'll never get rid of them. And the current situation, we've dealt with this in the strategy by dividing it up into different taxa. So let's start with the plants, the things I know most about. As we know, there are many large-scale invasions across the country, covering about 10% of the country, thousands of hectares, 381 species listed as invasive in the NEMBA regulations. Now, the main approach to this has been the manual clearing by Working for Water program, and there you see Kader Asmal in 1996 launching the Working for Water program. It has grown enormously, and it's responsible for funding just about all the alien plant clearing operations in the country. But let's not forget that the biological control of weeds also adds an enormous amount to a lot of the successes that have happened here. And there you see a nice little biocontrol agent on black wattle. And the other thing to note about our situation is that we have lots of conflict species. Pine trees that are used for forestry that are invasive in fynbos, jacaranda trees that are both invasive and popular with people in Pretoria, and so on. So the strategic approach here has always been, first and foremost with Working for Water, is to leverage funding through job creation. And the people that I've spoken to in DEA said, look, if it wasn't for the job creation aspects of this work, they would not be sitting with a 1 billion rand budget, they would be sitting with a 20 million rand budget, and they would not be able to do all of the things that they're doing now. So this is a double-edged sword. You have to now look after a lot of people. You have to meet dual goals of creating jobs and employment, as well as clearing alien plants, but the alternative is not viable. We need to prioritize, because we are not always working in the most important areas, but we have to honor existing commitments. So where we've already started clearing, we can't just abandon those projects. We've said they should double the biological control capacity over the next decade. They should really put more effort into planning, monitoring and evaluation. There's not nearly enough going into those aspects. Incentives and disincentives on private land backed by legislation. The new regulations are presumably going to help in that direction. If Philip Ivey appears one day with a haircut, then you'll know that the regulations have been passed. He told me he's not cutting his hair until they are passed. We think that you really need to do some proper assessments for these conflict species, pine trees, jacaranda trees, prosopis trees, trout. How should we be dealing with these things? And then finally, the utilization of biomass. Now that little picture in the bottom corner there is Guy Preston's office in Cape Town. And all of his furniture is made with wood harvested from invasive alien trees. It's beautiful furniture. And they have established what they call a program called Eco Furniture Factories, EFF. It's got nothing to do with geology.
We changed that.
I have to say it's got nothing to do with Julius Malema. But we really don't know whether this approach is the most effective way of dealing with invasive alien plants, but it certainly is effective politically, because it's all pluses. People get jobs. We're taking a resource that would otherwise be going to waste and turning it into something useful, etc., etc. So it's really going to be big in the way forward. When we come to vertebrates, it's really all about freshwater fish. We don't really have a large number of problematic birds or reptiles or mammals in this country. And the strategic approach here has been to separate our river systems into those that already have these fish, where they can't be eradicated, and allow people to continue fishing there, because they're quite passionate about this, throwing flies into the water and catching fish. And leave the areas where these fish don't occur, so that we can have some protection of the biodiversity there. So eradicate those fish where possible and desirable, but leave areas where they can still be used. And this is possible. This is the Rondegat River near the Cederberg, which in 2004 was completely clogged by wattles, and the river itself only had bass in it. All of the native fishes had been extirpated by the bass. And following clearing, the wattles are gone and the little minnows have returned. So that's the kind of strategy we'd want to follow with priority river areas. Invertebrates, again, the situation is that I think we don't really know, but thousands of invertebrate species have been introduced into this country. They're taxonomically poorly known, so people don't really know when they find a new insect whether it's actually an alien species or not. But at least 200 of them are known to be pests, mainly in agriculture, many of them serious pests. And environmental impacts are very poorly understood. We just don't know what impact these invertebrates are having. But there are many commodity-based agricultural research institutes that have developed control methods for invertebrates. So you have the Banana Research Institute and the Sugar Research Institute and the Veterinary Research Institute and so on. They all have developed ways of dealing with invertebrates. So the approach here has been to say, let's not worry too much about the established invertebrates. Let's focus on preventing the introduction of new invertebrate species, and let's leave the management to these commodity-based commercial institutes where they seem to know what they're doing and they have the expertise. And Environment Affairs is going to have to align its efforts here with the agricultural people. Then it comes to microbial organisms. It becomes really, really difficult. And this is anything that that you can't see with your naked eye. Okay. Now, first of all, these things are taxonomically poorly known. We have hardly any idea of what they are. So when you find a microbe, you have no way of knowing whether it's an alien species or whether it's always been here and you just found it for the first time. So dealing with them as alien species where you issue permits for their import and export is not an option here. In fact, we were not really sure what we could do around microbial organisms. They're everywhere, they're on everything, and they enter country on a daily basis by a variety of means. You all got them on you right now. And so there's examples, plant health, avian influenza, which knocked out ostrich farming in the Oudtshoorn area recently, rinderpest, which knocked out all the cattle in the country around 1900. These are all examples of what can happen. So the approach here is really we don't know what to do. We think you should establish a database of all of the role players in this field and try to evaluate what's currently going on. And finally, the marine species. The current situation is that we have we're only just getting a handle on this now, but there's up to 125 alien species which have been recorded as being alien and established in South Africa now. The entire rocky intertidal zone of the west coast and now going along the south coast is completely transformed. This is a mussel species you see in this picture, Mytilus gallo-provincialis, lovely name, a mussel from the province of Gaul. Didn't like that. But you know, we don't know what their impacts are. In fact, interestingly enough, the only impact I've seen of this mussel is positive in that it has allowed oyster catchers' numbers to go up again. So there's no active management programs in place at the moment on marine species. The approach is to try to develop management plans for the listed species. There are 12 invertebrate species listed in the NEMBA regulations. And the marine guys said they really want to have a look at the potential for biological control of some of these species. When we get to the legislative environment, I counted just before lunch now, we've reviewed 28 different acts or conventions that impact on invasive species management in South Africa. Many of them were promulgated to address some other issue other than invasive species. And there's no government department that has the sole mandate to manage invasive species in this country, so it falls between different government departments. So the approach here is to carry on with the implementation of the current regulations under NEMBA. And as I said earlier, that was going on while we were writing the strategy. Those things were being developed and published. And we've also brought up the possibility of having a dedicated invasive alien species act in South Africa. So we've got the outline for such an act in the strategy, and they're going to examine ways of taking that forward. Information management is another thing we were asked to address. There's some data on distribution of species, records of permits and so on, but there's no comprehensive list of all the alien species in this country, and the current information is really scattered and patchy. So most of it's also designed to serve another purpose. So we need to start with a user needs survey. We need to say, what information do people need to be able to do their jobs properly? We should have minimum standards for information, and then we should develop a database with an information portal that people can use. Now, as I say, the devil is in the detail, but the broad intent is there. Capacity building, really important. You know, the Working for Water program expanded from 25 million rands in 1996 to over R1 billion in 2004. That's an enormously quick growth. And where's the capacity going to come from to do all of that work? So there have been a few successful interventions to build capacity here and there. The biocontrol people had a nice program running, and I think they still have a program running, but it's small. It's not enough to fill the gaps. So what we've proposed is that there should be a formal diploma course developed somewhere at a college, a suitable college, and that bursaries should be awarded to people, and they should go through that process and graduate, and then they should be employed. If we'd done this 10 years ago, we'd be reaping the benefits of having a whole lot of trained people in the program. So I hope people are listening now and they get around to doing it. Doubling the biocontrol research capacity, I've said that already. Improving the level of training for field workers and other people as well. Research. Currently, we've got a long history of research. You know, we've been doing 100 years of biocontrol research. South Africa was involved in the SCOPE program on biological invasions in the early 1980s. So we were one of the about 4 or 5 countries that were leading the world in developing invasion ecology in those days. So it's not something new to us, and we've got many established research centres at universities and parastatals and so on. So there's a lot of research going on, but there's no research strategy. Nobody can show you these are the key questions that we should be asking in invasion ecology right now. So that's something that really needs to happen as a matter of urgency, so that we can become more proactive about commissioning and research. At the moment, it seems to be give us some proposals, and if we like them, we'll fund them. Also, we need to establish a scientific advisory panel. DEA has established a research advisory panel at the moment, but it's dysfunctional. It needs to be resurrected. I understand there are steps underway to get it going again. Raising awareness. At the moment, there's a lot of awareness being raised in different quarters, but there are a lot of mixed messages out there as well. So people are saying, hey, the alien pines are soaking up all the water and muscling out the fynbos. The next person is saying the destruction of aliens is misguided. I thought that conservationists and nature lovers were the same people, but they're not, apparently. And down at the bottom there, scientists at loggerheads. So we as scientists, we're not agreeing on some of these conflict species. So our strategic approach here is to have targeted dissemination of information. So we should, instead of trying to just blanket everybody with newspaper articles, we should target the nursery trade, the pet trade, the forestry trade, whoever it might be, and make sure that we get information to them. An outreach program which can help people establish forums. The correct term is fora, I think. The plural of forums is fora. And when I used fora, Kay told me I can't use that because people won't understand it. Forums, Kay. Forums. So, getting an outreach program so we can establish forums. There are one or two examples around the country where these are working, and we can have a whole lot more. A National Invasive Species Week has been proposed, and communication toolkits so that you have information to give to people when you need it. Now, the big question, who's going to pay for all of this? 3 minutes. I think I can do this. The current situation is that we have 1.22 billion rand is the annual budget for DEA for natural resource programs. And it's around about 500 million rand extra that's going through agriculture, forestry and fisheries for agricultural control import annually. Now, our economists estimated that if we were to implement this strategy everywhere, across all taxa, it would cost around about 5 billion rand actually, annually. So we don't have nearly enough money to implement this strategy. So the strategic approach is to realign some of our activities to maximize return on investment. What we're doing in some places we may not be working in the best places, we may not be working on the best species. We've really got to look at that. We must eliminate duplication of effort, and I'm thinking here of things that I think it's been solved now, but for example, if you wanted to import a biocontrol agent, you had to have a permit from both agriculture and environment affairs. So that kind of duplication is just wasting everybody's time. Increasing efficiencies. The economists tell me that it is obscene to ask for more money when you're not spending the money you've already got efficiently. And I support that fully as a taxpayer. In fact, I want to resign as a taxpayer. And then alternative sources of funding. Government cannot pay for this all by itself, and looking for sources of funding from the private sector, payment for ecosystem services and so on, is going to have to be pursued. We've ended our strategy with some indicators. It's really important that we monitor whether this strategy is being properly implemented. So the first thing to note is that we need baselines and targets. So we need to know baseline, where are we today? Where do we actually stand, so that we can estimate whether we are making progress. And the second thing around targets is this is a political commitment. All of us here today can agree on targets, but unless the politicians buy into that, then the strategy is just going to sit on the shelf and nobody's going to pay any attention to it. So we have to get that political commitment to say, okay, we agree to these targets. So we've got 36 high-level targets to track progress aligned with the objectives of the strategy. We think that DEA should make sure that these indicators are assessed periodically, and it can be a standing item on the agenda of the Scientific Advisory Panel to get these assessments done. So here's an example of a table from the final chapter of the strategy around some of the assessments. I'm not sure if I can read it from here. Change in the area occupied by priority listed invasive alien species, the number of populations of species, how many species are invasive in the country, how many species are under biological control at different levels, how many management plans are in place, and what area is being managed. Are those management plans achieving their goals, and successful prosecution of offenders under the legislation, or persecution as well, I suppose. Well, the Public Finance Management Act, which has been in place for 14 years, has not had one single prosecution yet. So what's the point of having legislation if you don't use it? So these are the indicators that we would like to see in place, and that is my last slide. I must stop now. So the conclusions, it's not my last slide, haha, fooled you. This is the first time that we've had a comprehensive strategy for the country. It covers all taxa, it covers all stages of invasion, it provides us with a solid foundation to build on, but we have to get that political support, and that's the big challenge that lies ahead of us. So thank you to DEA for funding this, to Sandy for supporting my attendance here, to the co-authors, several people who came to workshops in the development of the strategy, and those who interviewed it, who reviewed it, especially Guy Preston, who at the end got heavily involved, made me cancel a long weekend away so that I could get this thing finished by the end of March. Thank you.